Welcome in to Rounding the Bases Live, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. My name is Joel Goldberg. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Yes, episode number 55. Mention Enterprise Bank and Trust. Hashtag no stopping you. Appreciate their support and partnership in this podcast that is now in its fourth month. Started in March. Actually, one of our two guests today was one of my initial guests back in March, and now here we are here in June, and the world in many ways has changed, and well, it's definitely changed, and there are a lot of updates to talk about. We'll get to that in just a moment. We've got the Casey Cattle Company Wagyu beef ready to go for tonight in the Goldberg House, and you can check them out. They're up in Weston, Missouri. Veteran owned and operated, led by former U.S. Army Ranger Patrick Montgomery. They ship to all 50 states, so check them out. And just keep on looking at that website or their social media, because when they run out, they'll reload, and you want to be the first to get in there. It is worth every penny. And also, if you're down in Johnson County, check out nice, small, local, when I say small, that family feel to it. Liquor store, Wine Wednesday, 15% off bottles tomorrow. What I love about the guys in there and my buddy Mason and Jake and their crew is that they've got suggestions. They can answer your questions, so very personal. JJ's Wine and Spirits. You can also see their Facebook page for more information on the southwest corner of College and Antioch. Time now for my guests here on this episode, and when I say guests, I mean two of them and a couple of friends of mine. Dr. Allison Edwards, she's a return candidate on the show. How about that? I was looking up, I think it was episode 6 that you were on, which seems like a lifetime ago, and you were really my first guest to talk about coronavirus and the pandemic. Jay Austin is joining you, and the two of you have been collaborating in a really cool way for just a little while. We could talk about Jay's business too, Creators Group, because he is, as you might guess from the title there, a very creative person. Not to mention the very cool Royals shirt that he is wearing. Jay's a former baseball player, so he knows what's going on. We're also in a mastermind group together, and so I see what the two of you are doing in the collaborations. But let's begin with Allison, who is taking a nice drink out of her
logo mug,
company mug there. Yeah, I like that. KCDPC, Direct Primary Care. And we talked about that in the episode. Actually, I think we talked about that on the audio podcast. This is your third time on one of my shows.
I'm sorry. It's because I can't stop talking. You can't get me to be quiet.
I would criticize you for that, but that would be the pot calling the kettle black, because no one talks more than me. So I'll shut up and Allison, let you talk about this collaboration with Jay and what you guys have been doing in terms of testing and oh, by the way, I think this pandemic is still going on.
Correct. You're correct. And actually in preparing, because I'm like a nerd at heart, right? I'm like a scientist and a doctor, and like I like to have like facts. Preparing for today, I was like, I got to get some facts for Joel. Like
Good.
The big fact that I came up with was that we still don't know quite what's going on as far as the pandemic is concerned. Like we don't have a timeline for a vaccine. We don't know when things will get back to normal. Like we don't know a lot of things still, but as humans, right, like we try and control our world as much as we can. And so that's partly what Jay and I have collaborated on, is to try and figure out how to provide more testing in the Kansas City community. Particularly, this was a lot more urgent, and Jay can speak to this too, but it was a lot more urgent back, 12 weeks ago, when the health departments didn't have testing, and doctors' offices didn't know what to do with testing, and hospital systems didn't have testing. And so Jay and I have collaborated with a really awesome organization, a nonprofit here based out of the metro area, called Heart to Heart International. But some of your listeners may be aware of what they do, but they are a disaster response effort. They do medical missions to areas that are really hard hit in the moment that they're hardest hit. And so ironically, they're good at stepping in when things are chaotic, but they had never quite done something like what we've started with them, which is to say, wide scale community testing. It's been really fun.
Jay, you live in a different world than the medical field. Yet, as I've had the opportunity to get to know you over the last, I don't know what it is now, year and a half or so, it seems to me like your heart always moves you towards causes. You know, I mean, you're in the video world, you're in the creating world. I think that you're that true creative soul. And you know, I know this, we live in a content world. That you know that. I think I remember one of the first times you and I met, you talked about those micro bits of content, social media, and all of that. I love the fact that a guy that doesn't have a Twitter account is so good with the social media stuff. You know how to create, but it seems to me like you move into these big projects where your heart goes. What brought you to working with Allison?
Well, after one of our mastermind calls, it was a Thursday about 12 weeks ago. Allison was on there talking about COVID and how it relates to our businesses and what we should do with our employees and how all of that worked. And, I was sitting on the sidelines of this COVID fight, but I'm not one to sit on the sidelines when there's a fight to be had. And when I listened to Allison talk right away, I felt it. I was like, okay, I think maybe there's something that Allison and I can do. We hopped on the phone the next morning. It was a Friday morning. And as we started talking about the issue at hand, we were looking around and we were just asking simple questions like, where are all these tests? Are there any tests in our most vulnerable communities? Mm-hmm. And to be honest, at least my impression at that time was that we're missing something. We're crazy. Like somebody has got to be doing this, And so we took a weekend and we were looking around, and Sunday evening, I just felt a wave come over me. And I'm like, I think I really want to back Allison on this, whatever she's doing. At that time, though, we didn't really think that we were going to try to test a whole bunch of people. We just knew that we wanted to do something. And one of the things that Allison and I clicked on right away was this draw to causes. Allison's been doing it for her entire career. I've been doing it for my entire career. And that Sunday night, I texted her. I said, let's do something. I want to help you out with something. Then the idea started to evolve over the next week, and we came up with this wild idea that at the time we wanted to test 1% of the entire metro's population, so 24,000 people. And we still might do that, Allison. I haven't counted that out yet.
But I'm still the breaks, by the way, of this whole conversation. I'm like, I don't know, this seems crazy. And Jay's like, oh no, it's fine, we'll do it. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, and I'm a true believer in the convergence of private industry meets nonprofit meets government. I love living in the middle there. I think that's how you really start to get change. And I think innately we saw that was something that could happen. She is in a very unique position, being a direct primary care provider, to be able to do something that others can't really do. And we figured between our connections, between us, we should at least give it a shot.
And Allison's laughing in this, what did we get into? But Allison, you knew you were getting into something big, and you also knew how important. I mean, you came on this podcast and really, really talked about the severity of this virus, mm-hmm. the danger of this virus. I think it's interesting that, 2 months later, it's been 2 months, it's been more than 2 months, yeah. that you're saying there's still a lot we don't know.
Right.
I mean, this is tricky stuff. Plus, you're also adding in the element of the importance of community, I guess is the way mm-hmm. I'd say it. Like, we're communal people, mm-hmm. and we all want to get back out, and people are starting to do that. Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. I tend to be more on the side of being cautious, and I don't say that judging people. There's way too much judging going on, in my opinion, which is counterproductive, right or wrong. Like, if I want to wear a mask to the grocery store, which I am, don't look at me funny. I'm going to try not to look at you funny too if you're not. But I think what has happened here, my long diatribe on this, is just that we have so much uncertainty in our lives. Some of that lack of certainty, to me, would be solved with testing.
Yeah.
If everybody keeps saying that the point of wearing a mask is not to protect you, it's to protect others. And so, we've been pretty good about shielding our family and taking this seriously. But, and I've said this before, you know, I got a 17-year-old that we kept contained for about 8 weeks. And now I have to hope that he is doing things the right way. I can't guarantee that something isn't being brought into my house by him or by the worker that had to come by that wasn't wearing a mask. And yeah, I mean, just everybody is dealing with different situations. But boy, it'd be certainly nice if we could just at least know where we stand in terms of testing. Where is that all at right now?
From just a simple testing perspective, since we last talked, the antibody tests have come out over the last couple of weeks. And so there's 3 types of tests, 2 of which are widespread, and the third one is still kind of in development. The one that everybody knows about the most is the one where you go in the nose, and that's what's called a molecular test or a PCR test. And without getting in the weeds, essentially what that does is it grabs little particles of the RNA that make up that virus, and it looks specifically for the presence of the virus in your nose. So in order for that to be positive, you actually have to be like actively infected. And so that's kind of what you're alluding to. And like, we could get a little bit more certainty if we could have that sort of testing be really common. And then the next type of testing is what's called antibody testing. And that's where you're going to want to take a blood sample. So it can be like a finger prick. It could be like one of those draws that you get in your arm, but that takes your serum or your blood, the liquid component of your blood, and it looks for antibodies that are directed against the coronavirus. And what's tough about that one is that it's not perfect, because when they designed this test, you can think of the coronavirus as sort of like a puzzle piece or a key. And they designed that test so that the marker that they're looking for, it fits into that key or that puzzle piece really well. Now, the problem is there's more than one coronavirus, and they're all kind of similar. And so it's not a perfect test, because you may be positive, but it's hard to say if you're positive to the actual coronavirus that we're worried about, or perhaps the prior one that you've had. Because honestly, the coronavirus, it causes the common cold. And so we've all had one before, just not this specific one. And then the third one that we don't need to spend time talking about is called antigen testing. And it's similar to like the nasal swab, but that one's just still a little bit in development. We don't have it, but the counties are providing free testing when it comes to the nasal swabs. Johnson County, Jackson County, and Wyandotte County are the ones that I just checked today. It's free of charge, but you do have to be symptomatic or have a very clear exposure to somebody who has COVID. So it's not sort of, to your point about like widespread testing and getting some safety and security from that, we're not there yet, though we're doing better than the last time we talked.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot better, and I would hope so. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was late March, and now here we are moving into the second week of June. Jay, what have you seen with your involvement in this? And I'm sure that, well, I know that you don't have the medical background that Allison does, neither do I, but yet you find yourself living in that world now. So what have you learned?
This has been a great learning experience. And actually, one of the biggest things that I've learned is that the medical system, how all this stuff works, is really being shown to me. And if I had to really categorize our project, our testing project, it wouldn't necessarily be in the category of trying to really, really, truly prevent the spread of coronavirus at large. What we're really addressing are inequities in the system. And that's a really important aspect of our project, is that we're going into communities that we know don't usually have great access to great health care. Maybe they don't have health insurance associated with their job. Many of these folks do not have health insurance. Many of these folks maybe don't even speak English. And many of these folks may not even trust traditional healthcare, mainstream healthcare. And that would be the thing that I'm learning, is that in these communities, the same one that I grew up in, I didn't know how big of a difference there was between our community and other communities where testing is more abundant or healthcare is more abundant. So from a movement standpoint, something that has been reestablished in my mind is the importance of getting community organization first, have it come from within, and then supplement it from the external places.
Well, and this thing, it takes time, obviously, right? I mean, it's so easy for a layman like me or Jay like you to say, well, just get us a test, and it just doesn't happen that easily, right? I was looking back when you two sent an email to our mastermind group about what you were doing. I'm looking at it. It was April 8th, which, Jay, you said that you and Allison had teamed up to try to bring 23,000 COVID-19 tests within the next 4 weeks. That could potentially, this is the one that got me, that could potentially test 1% of the Kansas City metro. Start doing the math. We need a lot more than, that 23,000 and on and on and on. Just out of curiosity, Allison, what's the process in getting these tests? How does that, they don't just, like we're used to saying, hey, I need to go to fill in the blank of your drugstore, whichever one of the big ones or small ones, to go get your flu shot, which I think I'm sure I told you when I had you on last time, what my fear of needles, but I actually had my first ever flu shot last off season. Yes. And
you donated blood too recently. Kudos.
Oh yeah, I did that too. Don't tell anyone, because I think I'm eligible to donate again in late May.
Yeah, you just outed yourself. I was going to say anything.
Know. I'll do it again. It was plus I had, you guys will both appreciate this. I know that Jay's a huge baseball fan. I had Hudler was in there with me at the same time. So if you're scared of needles, I swear, I know I'm getting off on another tangent here, but I didn't know. I've never donated blood in my life because I was always the guy that passed out when blood was being drawn or came close to passing out. Total wimp with needles. And so I didn't actually realize that when you go to draw blood that it's in there for 15 minutes. Like, I just thought it was like a 1-minute thing. So to have Hudler there doing Hudler type of things was like, I would recommend that if you have a fear of needles or a fear of anything for that matter, fear of jumping or bungee jumping, bring Hudler. Fear of, fear of heights, fear of snakes, fear of whatever, because he will distract you as he does every single night. So I don't want to say I enjoyed the drawing blood experience, but it wasn't bad. And it felt good to be able to contribute.
Yeah.
But, like we think about all those type of things, going to give blood, going to get a flu shot or whatever it is. And that stuff's readily available, right? You go to your drugstore, you call up and you say, can I have that? So what's the process of getting more of these? How does it work?
I feel like it would almost be more interesting to hear Jay explain this, considering that there's so many things that I'm like, oh yeah, of course this is how it goes, that aren't like exceptional to me. Like, Jay, I don't know, like, how complex is it?
What's your perspective on that? I mean,
and I can fill the blanks, obviously, but anyway, I think it'd be more relevant.
Yeah. Well, I think if we go back to when we first started this and we were talking about how to get these tests, this was at the very beginning of the pandemic in the U.S., at least the hysteria about it. And there were a lot of people who were coming out of the woodwork with hyper-capitalist motives. You had hyper-socialist motives. You had everything was on the table because we were just trying to figure out how to get these things. And remember, at that time, too, we were running out of everything. Ventilators, we had no PPE. We didn't have anything. And so the testing portion of it, to me, was very fascinating because I remember the day when Allison and I talked. And, she was focused on the medical side of things. I was focused on the community outreach side of things, right? And we talked, and she said that a couple lab providers here in Kansas City had the tests. And I remember asking, like, well, how do we get them? And she said, well, got to have money. And in that moment, I was like, wait. So we've been hearing nothing but shortage here, scarcity here, scarcity. But the minute you show up with the right dead president, then all of a sudden you have access to these things. So that was the very first thing. Now, as time has gone on, I think at large, the system has begun to smooth itself out in terms of getting these tests out, at least for the PCRs. But we're still seeing the hyper-capitalistic side and venture-backed lab side coming out for the antibody tests. And that that has been really fun's not the right word, but fascinating to watch, because the efficacy of those tests are so all over the place.
Yeah.
But the mission behind them, the money-making mission behind them, has been used almost as an excuse to say, well, just move fast and break things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But now
it's not how science and medicine, I mean, like, yes, you have to like experiment, like there's a point of science, but like you are literally dealing with people's lives. Like you can't break them. It doesn't work that way. Like, it's terrible. But yeah, to Jay's point, like it's a huge, like I think at one point, Jay, I even texted you a picture. I was like, this is what a swab looks like. Like, here it is. And that's one step of like 20 steps, including the financial, including the PPE, including the logistics, like all of these things. Like testing is not a thing as much as it is a process. And when you, Joel, show up to get your flu shot or your test or something like that is like this much, like tiny little bit of like the entire process that has to happen to get you that thing. It's insane.
Well, and the three of us were talking before we went on live here too. I said on the air. I guess everything's the air nowadays, with the way you can stream things. Who knew I was going to be doing shows during baseball season from a closet, right?
It's a nice closet.
It's not, but the background looks good, so that's all that. I don't have Jay's fancy chair. It was coming out there. We were going there, Jay.
It's a very beautiful chair.
But when we were talking about baseball and coming back, and there's so much dissension, tension, fighting about money. Funny how what is keeping baseball from coming back is money. Funny what's keeping more testing is money. It always goes back to money. I actually would say that it's more than money in terms of baseball. There are a lot of elements beyond that, but what's being fought about publicly is the money. But one of the elements they have to figure out, we talked about this, was the testing. And so baseball has this ability and the deep pockets to pretty much be able to do whatever they want with that. But just because they test fill in the blank name of player or coach or anyone that's associated with that locker room, we won't be allowed in the locker rooms this year. They're going to do everything they can to close that circle, which I understand. As a journalist, typically I would be crying foul over that. But I get it. They need to protect the people in that circle to be able to keep this game going. And that's the discussion about fans, no fans, all that.
Right.
Even if they have access to a test every day, Allison, that doesn't mean that they can get answers every day, does it?
Not at this point. Although it goes back, it's like money talks, right? Because if you have a small lab, and like kind of what Jay was saying, like a lot of these venture-backed labs, like any good capitalist looks at this opportunity and says, MLB wants turnaround times of 2 to 3 hours. You give us enough money, we'll give you turnaround times of 2 to 3 hours. And so it's the beauty of capitalism. It's also the sort of dirty side of capitalism, is that if you don't have the money, you don't get that test in 2 to 3 hours. And I'm, rightly or wrongly, that's just sort of kind of how it is at this current time. I think what's more interesting, and this applies like to the MLB situation, but also more widely, is that I'm seeing a lot of my patients come in and say, I can't go back to work until I have a negative COVID test. Which makes no sense, because
Right.
Let's say I swab somebody today, like right now at this moment, 11 or 12:30 on a Tuesday. That person is in limbo because I use commercial labs. I don't have the money and the backing to negotiate with VC-backed labs. But I'm going to get that person a result in like 2 to 5 days. Sometimes we've gone up to 8 days. So that person is out of work for 8 days. When they get that result, at the worst, when they get the result back, all we can tell them is that they were negative 8 days ago.
8 days ago.
Right. And so, and that's the frustrating part, is that employers, in an attempt to protect themselves and their staff, are putting more weight on these tests than is actually, it doesn't make any sense to do this to your employees or frankly to your business. Although if you had a turnaround time of a couple hours and you had the purchasing power to do that, that would be an actionable thing. That would be something that would be helpful. But as it currently stands, forcing, employees to get tests where you don't get results within, a reasonable amount of time doesn't work. Just doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many levels to this, right? I mean, they're talking about temperature checks.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean that anyone that has 100-degree temperature going forward when they begin, if they begin checks at, say, an airport, gets
Right.
turned, so everybody potentially has, there's a lot to figure out here,
Yeah,
you know,
there's no right answer.
and obviously the more we know, the better. The quicker we know it, the better. I mean, this certainly gets into a discussion about everything that Allison, that you believe in terms of your practice and why you moved into direct primary care, to try to take some of that burden off of your patients and yourself, for that matter, too, of having to answer to hours and money and all that type of thing. So Jay, where are you guys at right now in terms of this endeavor, and where's it going? And I do want to pop this up here too, and I'll keep it up for a while because it's a little bit of a longer website address, but it is a way for everyone to potentially get involved and help the cause, because as we just mentioned, unless anything's changed, Allison and Jay aren't millionaires and billionaires, I don't think. So they're looking for help here in the midst of all of this and what you guys are doing. Where are things at right now, Jay?
Yeah, so right now we are up to 3 days a week in testing in some cases, although this is, like I said, a constant learning process. The project lead over at Heart to Heart International, his name is Tina. He's the one who, if you get in contact with us, if you're a business owner, if you are a leader at any organization and you want your people tested, we would send you to Tina. Well, Tina is the one who's putting together the strategy for how we continue to roll this out. We've received funding from the CDC Foundation that covers up to the first 5,000 tests, which is really, really crucial, especially in these marginalized neighborhoods who are filled with people who maybe don't have health insurance. So things are constantly changing. The latest that I heard was that we're finding more success right now in sending more people to a single test site. To give you context, what we had been trying to do was find organizations that had somewhere between 50 and 150 people who would want all of their folks tested on one day. We would go and set up in their parking lot. We're very mobile. That's a distinction between our project and other projects. We would go to them and they would get tested. What started happening is that, of course, you always have attrition, right? There's always going to be a certain percent of people who don't show up to the test, especially because this is not mandatory. So what Tina has decided is that our approach for the foreseeable future is we're going to try and find locations that have kind of a critical mass of folks, and then drive other business organizations and businesses there to get their employees tested. We're going to test as long as we have funding. We're going to go on as long as we can without putting this into stone. I think the vision is eventually to add antibody testing to the strategy. It's going to be crucial, but especially as businesses and organizations reopen, this is going to become more and more important. So that's where we are right now, and that's where we're going.
And I'll add too, we've mentioned a couple times without clarifying that we're recruiting businesses and community organizations or nonprofits, specifically that serve sort of an essential worker population that, as Jay has said, mentioned before, that perhaps a population that doesn't that's been disenfranchised from the healthcare system. And so if you feel like your business fits that mold, or a nonprofit where you serve a lot of people who do fit that mold or anything, at first when we said this, we're like, well, let's take it to employers. And the first thing we talked about, like, maybe we could recruit through the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce or something like that. And I was like, I don't think it's our goal to test a major corporate like Cerner, for example. Like, they're ensuring they have the means to do that. And so what we're looking for are the smaller corporations, mom and pop shops, the entities that make our community really thrive and be as awesome as it is, to support that structure. So we're taking both. You can donate, obviously. We're providing all of our testing for free to these entities. And like Jade mentioned, with the coordination of Heart to Heart and Tina, we are recruiting those businesses and community nonprofits that serve marginalized populations.
Well, and look, this all comes back to, and you talk about the mom and pops, and certainly the Cerner money or any of those big corporations, if they can help, well, great great too. I mean, to me, ultimately, this is about community, and it's one of the, to me, it's been one of the most rewarding things about starting this podcast. I know, Jay, when you reached out at one point and, you were telling all of our group what was going on, and I said, like, I'm not a good fundraiser at all. I've done that a couple of times. I'm just not comfortable with it. However, I know that I at least have a platform of people that are going to watch this live or later, and we all have different ways to do our part. But I think in the end, and this is one of my final questions to both of you, Jay, you grew up here. You know this community. You love this community. I'm just curious, beyond just your involvement with Allison, what you have seen from this community. And I always use the reference of the Royals championship parade and the 800,000 people, which is a kind of a funny one right now because we're being told we shouldn't be around large groups of people. But there was a spirit that day in Kansas City. I think every community says they have this, but why was it different? Why was our parade? Why was our get together different? And so, amicable and everybody. I think there were 3 arrests. It's debatable whether there were 2 or 3. That doesn't happen in other places. I'm just curious. I mean, it's just a general question. What you've seen here in your community over these last few months, where I think all of our perspective on life has changed in some form or another.
Yeah. So I have to give credit where credit is due. There's a man who I disagree with on almost everything, except on his response to the COVID-19 outbreak and to what we're dealing with the protests right now following George Floyd's death. And that's Mayor Lucas. I think he's handled this as well as he could. He's got an almost impossible job, and he's doing impossibly well at it from my perspective. So first of all, strong leadership is crucial. And when it's missing, you notice it missing. So props to him. And from the community aspect, I just want to remind people that we're far from out of the woods with this thing. If you look at the numbers, our numbers don't look as scary as what happened in Seattle. Our numbers don't look as scary as what happened in New York City. They don't have to. They don't have to look as bad as that. What we're talking about at the end of the day is somebody who you care about, no matter where they live, could get affected by this, and it could be your fault. And we have to keep that in mind. We can't get sidelined or sidetracked. We can continue to do the important things. I'm a big supporter. I mean, I work in criminal justice reform, so obviously I'm out there. I'm making sure my voice is heard, making sure people know what to do in the aftermath of all this. We have to keep in mind that our protests are exactly how this thing begins to spread. So we need to show care. One of the most amazing things that I've seen is as people have gone out and gathered, they're coming from all parts of the city. And even though our work is focused on testing marginalized communities, aka communities that most people who are showing up to the protest never even go to, they never travel a little bit further east, they never travel a little bit further to the northeast. We are now sharing a common ground over a single topic that is underlaid by the fact that we're still in a pandemic. We're showing how connected our entire community is. And this, to me, is proof that no matter where you live, a virus anywhere can affect you. It's important that we stamp it out. So continue building trust with each other, continue building trust between medical establishments and folks who are typically marginalized from the community. So at the end of the day, if this entire globe has been shaken up like a snow globe and the systems have been shaken up, it's up to us to figure out how the particles land to make sure that it's a little bit more equitable and just.
Well said, Allison. How about you and what you've seen in the community? And I'll also give you the last word in terms of medical, but I'll preface it by saying, because I think you and I align on this. I said before, I don't want to judge people. I just think it's counterproductive. Mm-hmm. We got enough in this world that we're arguing about. But I keep saying I'm going to trust the doctors because there's a reason why I did not do well in science. So I'm going to rely on those that know science. With that said, what I want to preface it with is Look, I've talked to different doctors that have different takes on this too. That's the confusing part to me. When I talk to a friend of mine that's a doctor that doesn't think this is anywhere near as severe as others do, and then others say it is, and I maybe it's just my personality to go more towards the cautious route, and that's
Mhm.
where I'm comfortable. But what's your take on community and in terms of safety at this point?
So Jay really eloquently said, uh, I think there's virality in the pandemic that we're dealing with. And there's also a certain viral nature of ideas, thoughts, and what we say to one another. And ideas is contagious and propagates and gets repeated and repeated. And from a public health standpoint, from a health standpoint, what we propagate, those viral ideas, quite literally, we call them viral on social media. They need to be, based in a sort of where your heart is coming forth with love. And I think that love and judgment are sort of they're sort of the opposites, and to really have that loving heart and be open for those conversations, so that becomes the viral message that we send, is to sit down with people who you don't have to agree with the person you're sitting down with, but to have that moment with them, separated by 6 feet, to have that conversation. And I don't have, and Jay and I spent about half an hour before we got on today talking about how to have conversations that are hard in the context of our protests, and in the context of our pandemic, and in the context of economic uncertainty, and in the context of everything, all of these elements that we thought we had, stable footing underneath us, or some of us had the privilege of thinking we had stable footing, and are just kind of learning how fragile everything is. And so sit down, um, and the word you used earlier, community and communal, they have the same Latin root, and they're important. From a public health standpoint, we are social creatures. So find your people, have your conversations, lead with love, be respectful. And I think that that's going to do a lot of healing from like an emotional standpoint. From a scientific standpoint, regarding where we're at with what the heck do we do with this pandemic? Your point in saying, you've kind of been a little bit conservative, I think, is where I err as well. Because if I take a risky stance as a physician, again, going back to our, move fast, break things, if I take a risky stance, I put people's lives in danger. And so as a scientific clinician, I have to take a conservative stance in what I recommend. And people can call me out for that maybe I'm being too protective or too careful. But that's my job, is to be careful. And so from that standpoint, we're learning every day that how COVID is transmitted, the how many people die when they are infected, and more research is saying, like, as we've known, it is more deadly than flu. It is more taxing on the healthcare system than flu. We were hoping that we would. I'm rambling now, so cut me off. But we were hoping that.
That's what I do. It's what I do. So
Okay, good. I mean, we were hoping we would see a decrease in the summer months, just because that's kind of how a lot of these winter viruses behave. But we're not seeing it. We're still seeing growth of cases. And it may be something that, as the winter months kind of set in on us and we go back indoors and we're in more close contact, that we will see or need to adapt to figure out how to better protect ourselves until we can get a usable vaccine. So blah, blah, blah. I mean, wash your hands, don't touch your face. I am a proponent of wearing masks, not because they're 100% effective, but because it is a symbol of saying I'm protecting, the people around me from my secretions, to use a fancy word. But it's the best we can do to go back and say, this is my expression of love for my community, is that I'm going to stay as distant from other people as possible in this moment from a physical standpoint, and wear my silly mask.
yeah, and look, we got a lot of great people in town involved in mask endeavors. So
Mm-hmm.
we're not where we were a while ago, where you had to put on the super uncomfortable, awful. Most of us, Allison, have never worn a mask before because
Yeah.
we're not in your field. And I think that was weird. I remember the first time I put it on, I kind of looked around like, is anybody else doing this? And now you don't even think about it, or you don't do it. I don't know. I've already stated where I'm at. I just would finish this, and if you guys have another thought, feel free to jump in. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and that communal aspect of it, that what is going on in this country in terms of racial injustice. And I've been wanting to speak out about this and have been speaking out about it lately because I don't know that I fully understood it. As someone that was raised to treat everyone equally, and I think I always did, I didn't always, no, not always, I didn't walk in their shoes because I didn't understand it. So I didn't understand what people were born with and the steeper hill that they potentially had to climb because of the color of their skin. I better understand that now, and I believe that while I wish we were all back to work and we were all back to the way things were before, or if we could get back to some form of that, because it won't ever be exactly the same, I believe that being cooped up the way we have been, which is against being communal, that it is in some ways pushed people to the streets as they witnessed a murder. And it was a murder that we saw on camera. And I think people would have been just as angry about that. I mean, think about how many times moments like that have happened, but they weren't caught on camera. You know, we watched that happen, and many of us would have just gone to the office the next day because we had to be at work. But now we're home and we're craving being around people. So there's this sort of cycle of we want to get back out, we want to be on a team together, we want to be with each other in the same way that people went to that parade of celebrating something together. Now people are joining together of different colors, and they've been cooped up, they want to get out. But oh, by the way, we still need that mask. You know, and people will, like, I would never tell anybody not to protest. Right. I would at least suggest that you do it in a safe way to your health. And I think that's there's this cycle. Is that all making sense? There's this cycle of what's going on. I think that there's not a whole lot of good that's come of this pandemic, although I believe there's opportunity. You guys had an opportunity to collaborate together that maybe you never would have. Who knows? You know, Jay, you're a different person today because of this collaboration. I know that that's true. So that's a product of this pandemic. This podcast is a product of that pandemic. We can come up with a million things. And I believe that more people have taken to the streets because they were bothered by what they saw and they had the ability to get out there, which wouldn't have happened without this pandemic. I just sit there and I keep thinking, but I hope though in that passion, it doesn't lead to more bad health.
Yeah. And Joel, speaking to what we're seeing with the protests, I see some hard to see, but nonetheless true connections between the injustice that we saw inflicted on George Floyd to what's happening in our more marginalized communities from a healthcare perspective. I think what we saw, and staying apolitical here, because I am when I work on reform, it's bipartisan, because none of this makes sense. None of it makes sense that we have 2.3 million people locked up. None of this makes sense that we have the largest immigrant detention machinery in the world. None of that makes sense. It's bipartisan. When the world got to sit at home and see a man put his knee on another man's neck for almost 9 minutes, when we got to watch the video and listen to the dialogue of a voice saying, get up, get in the car, man. And he says, I will. I can't. The knee's in my neck. I can't breathe. And then the voice says, get up, get in the car. And the guy says, I can't move. That is metaphorically one of the most accurate representations of what systemic oppression actually looks like. It was so hard for people who have never had the experience to understand a situation like Mike Brown, a large man running towards somebody, potentially with his hands up, potentially scary. It was so hard for people who never experienced it to understand a Tamir Rice situation, a kid playing with a toy gun. It's so hard to understand all of these more violent situations. They couldn't relate. We didn't have the psychological standing to be able to say, I can speak on that. I can stand up for that. I can point to that and say that's unjust. When we saw a knee on the neck, a death that was so non-violent in many ways, we began to see what it has been like, the Black experience has been like for people in America since the 50s and 60s, at least, when they got their rights. And this is why our project even manifested the way it did. There shouldn't necessarily need to be a project like ours, right? There shouldn't necessarily need to be a project like ours. But because These communities have a ton of underlying health issues, and those have been portrayed as moral issues, not healthcare issues. And that's why we have to go into the Northeast. That's why we have to go into KCK. That's why we have to go east of Truths and make sure that our community and our neighbors are healthy.
Amen.
I was about to say the same thing. I'll end it there because I don't want to dilute anything that you just said, and I could echo it, and so that's what I'll do. But beautifully said, Jay. I'm proud to call both of you friends. I'm proud to support what you two are doing. As I wrap it up, let's just put this up there again, because any organizations that want to get involved to help in this community, to help the underserved, to be able to help bring justice. And by the way, justice, all right, I'm not going to go on a rant, but justice is, I hear my producer right now, who I believe is in North Carolina. He's not with me yet, but wrap it up. Let's go. We got to go. But welcome to my life. But, you know, all of this isn't just about police brutality. This is about injustice in all phases of life. So the medical field, access to healthcare would be part of that. And so I think that's, you know, yet another message to this. So heart to heart, the address is up there. You guys continue letting me know what you're doing. I know you will, because you're letting everyone in our group and others know. I'm happy to pass those messages on any single time. I am grateful, not just for what you guys are doing, but for the conversation medically, but also in terms of community. I'm glad we were able to cover a little bit of what we did here at the end. It's something that I've figured out with this podcast. We could talk about anything, and it's very, I've learned in the last couple of weeks, it's liberating to have that freedom to be able to do that. Not that I don't have that freedom on TV, but there's time constraints, you know, and there's like, hey, by the way, we got to talk about baseball. We could do anything here. And so I'm glad that you guys were able to come on, share the perspective, continued success with what you're doing. And I look forward to just following it and seeing how many people you guys are helping. So Jay, Austin, Dr. Allison, Edwards, appreciate you guys. Thanks for doing it.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Joel.
All right. Great to visit with both of them, and I hope that everyone has learned a little something from that. We've got much more coming up. You guys may know now, 55 episodes in, I don't do a whole lot of baseball talk on the show. I'm not opposed to it. We got the whole separate baseball podcast, and I got my whole separate baseball world. But my broadcast partner, Jeff Montgomery, Royals Hall of Famer, is going to be on tomorrow, and we're going to talk about the labor situation right now. When is baseball coming back? Monty was very much involved in the union when he played, and is one of the smartest guys I know in and out of baseball. So he'll have a way of breaking this down from an owner and a player's side, and player needs and safety and all of that in a way that I don't think a lot of people have heard. So I hope you'll join me for that tomorrow at noon. It streams on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. It's up later on LinkedIn. You can find this stuff live or after the fact. And also, tomorrow's Wine Wednesday, 15% off bottles at JJ's Wine and Spirits. You can go any day. Great service. Southwest corner of College and Antioch. KC Cattle Company has the Wagyu beef. Their social media feed will keep you updated on their stock and what's going on. And you can order right from the website. They deliver to all 50 states, including taking it down here to Kansas City. Veteran owned and operated, so check them out. And a big thanks to my friends at Enterprise Bank and Trust, #NoStoppingYou. Thank you to Jay and Allison for their insight and for what they're doing in our community. And thanks to all of you for watching. Hope to catch you tomorrow on Rounding the Bases Live, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust.